1573, Spafford, accompanied by his wife and 4 daughters, made preparations to embark on an ocean liner bound for Europe. However, due to pressing business matters, Spafford decided to change his plans at the last minute and did not board the ship. Tragically, during the voyage, the vessel collided with another, sinking beneath the waves. While Spafford's wife miraculously survived, all 4 of their beloved daughters perished at sea. Days later, Horatio received a telegram from his wife with a simple yet haunting message: survived alone. Overwhelmed by sorrow, Horatio embarked on a journey to join his wife in England. It was during this voyage that the ship's captain pointed out the approximate location where the shipwreck had occurred, the place where his precious daughters had been lost forever. In the depths of his pain, Spafford found solace in his unwavering faith in Jesus, and from the depths of his soul, he penned a hymn that echoed his resolute trust in God.
When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. But Lord, 'tis for thee, for thy coming we wait. The sky, not the grave, is our goal. Oh, trump of the angel, oh, voice of the Lord, blessed hope, blessed rest of my soul. It is well.
Broadcasting live from the Free Speech Studios. Deep within the city of Fountain. With over 4 years of satisfying the curious mind and looking damn sexy while doing it. Ladies and gentlemen, Phantom Fact Society.
Broadcasting live from a Chinese-made microphone. Running solo today with a very special interview discussing Schideler's Goal by C S Lark. I've got tabs. I've got receipts on this book. This book deals with Anisha, the main character. We'll go over it more with C S Lark. It's a fascinating story based on what was going on in Poland at that time, which I think, and we'll have to talk to her about this, especially about as she got feedback on her book of how well the Holocaust is being remembered as generations seem to grow further and further away from it. It'd be very interesting to have her take on it. But without further ado, let's welcome C S Lark. Just give you guys here at Phantom Facts a little bit of history about C S Lark. She's got many accomplishments. She's just coming off of working 2 political campaigns, one with Lily Tang Williams, who we were very fond of on this show. And C S Lark graciously reached out to do an interview with us after that. I'm sure it was a nightmare was over. She's graduated college with high honors in the Phi Beta Kappa Society, as well as National Honor Society. And at working her political campaigns before all this, I believe she wrote this book, Schideler's Goal. So without further ado, we'll have C S Lark. How many years removed are you from this book now?
5.
5 years now. Is it crazy how
Yes.
quickly that goes?
It is crazy. I actually wrote the book when I was in high school. So it's crazy to think that was a long time ago.
So you're writing this book your senior year of high school. Is that correct?
Yep.
Around that time.
Yep.
Why? Like at what point did you decide, I'm going to write a book about the Holocaust?
So I was homeschooled at the time. I had left public school my freshman year, and during my senior year, we had this program at my homeschool co-op, which for those who don't know, a homeschool co-op is basically where homeschool students go. Usually it's twice a week. Mine was Tuesday and Thursday. And it's basically where we can do basically what you do in school, and you can get the credits to graduate. So I was going there Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I had this one class called 1 Year Adventure Novel. And I was supposed to write an adventure novel. Problem is, I don't like adventure novels. So I was sitting in the class and I was like, what am I going to do? So I got home and I talked to my mom and I was like, well, I really love history. And so I talked to my teacher at the time and she's like, okay, so we'll kind of modify the curriculum for you so you can do this book. And to be honest with you, there was a competition afterwards. The 1 Year Adventure Novel program had a competition, and I think I had to submit it in like August, and the results came out in October. And I made the finals, but I didn't make I didn't make it high enough in the finals to actually be one of the chosen contestants. And I was like really disappointed for about a week, and then I was like, you know what, I want to try something. So I took my manuscript, everything that I had written, and I had sent it to a publisher. I had looked at a few different publishers, but I found Christian Faith Publishing, and I sent it to them, and I didn't hear back. And it was like, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks went by. So I called Christian Faith Publishing and I said, hey, just wanted to ask the status of my book. And the woman said to me, she said, well, they've never said this. She says, I'm in my 60s. I've been with this company for over 30 years. They've never said this. But they want to publish it as is. They don't want you to change any content. The only thing is the grammatical errors that you have, that they will change. So that was what started me on this whole thing. I was very surprised because I hadn't even won a contest for the book. So I was like, okay, you want to publish this book. The process wasn't too extraneous. I think it was mostly negotiating the contract was what was the most difficult. But pretty much for people who are wondering, when you get your book to a publisher, it goes before a review board. They read about 10 pages of your book. Then they decide, is this book worth my time? If it is, they basically write up a contract, which then I have to read, look it over, agree, and then I pay them up front. And then they do all of the edits, all of that, and all of that gets sent back to me. And then I have to go through each stage and approve that. And then at the end of that, there's I get an ISBN number, copyright, and then they do a mass-wide press release, which then sent it to basically flooded the markets worldwide. I've had sales in the UK. I've had sales in India, which is very interesting. But yeah, so
we get a lot of downloads in India. So I just Secret Service of India is forced. They have so many people, they just outsource different things. That's my belief, but it could be different. Well, and now I don't know if you've noticed, the amount of Christians in China has now surpassed the numbers for the Communist Party Communist Party, and so they've had a release come out just recently warning about the dangers of Christianity in China. So it's fascinating to see all these different areas where Christianity pops up, even where it's not wanted. And you see that, like, the book, who knows who it's reached to. When you look back on this book, 2019, you wrote it. why this subject matter? Like, why was this the jumping point off for your career in writing?
So there's a multifaceted answer to that. The first answer is I had family in World War II. I won't get into too much of it, but I'm adopted, so I have like 4 sets of grandparents, and from those 4 sets of grandparents, I have about 3 of them were in World War II, and then one of my great grandfathers was at the unconditional surrender of Japan. So it was it was something that I love history, but I also, as you were saying in the opening, I was seeing a lot of rewriting of history. To go back when I was in public school, I was in 7th grade. We learned about the Holocaust. We didn't learn so much about World War II, but when we learned about the Holocaust, my teacher said to us, we were reading the Diary of Anne Frank, and she said, well, you know, Hitler's excuse was that there was just overpopulation, so he needed more room for the Germans. And it didn't really make sense to what we were reading. And then we went to DC and we went to the National Holocaust Museum. But I think what really
How old were you when you went to that museum?
I was 13.
That's how old I was when I went there. And it's the best thing you can do for your kids is to take them to a place at around that age, because I think it's all a joke up until that point. And then once you walk in that building and it resets your whole body to 1943, 1944, and you get your little card of, what type of prisoner you were, and then you follow the floors and you follow your path and you see how you died, because everyone died,
yeah.
It's an eye-opening experience. And I mean, that had to have had a huge impact on you. Was there something specific about that trip to that museum?
Well, I don't remember much of that time. But I think the thing that made the most impact was when you went into that room and they had that big circle and they showed how they did the experiments on the Jews. And I didn't really understand it. When I was learning about it when I was 13, I was not understanding. I didn't have a teacher that actually sat down and explained it. For example, we walked in one day and she said, oh, we're going to watch the movie Boy in the Striped Pajamas. And I didn't understand the whole aspect, the whole dynamic. We never read the book. I didn't know what was going on. And so for me, when they went into the gas chamber and the Nazis called it a shower, well, I went home and for about 2 years, I wouldn't take a shower because I didn't understand the whole thing of that this is what happened, and I think that's one of the biggest things in school is they throw these dates and numbers at you, but also in the rewriting of history, take, for example, like the Pilgrims, right? When I was in school, I learned the Pilgrims came over in the little funny outfits with those little funny hats. But then you watch something like Kirk Cameron's Monumental, and you see that the Pilgrims came over for religious reasons. They came over because they were being basically discriminated against by King James in England. And then you go to step into public school today, and what you hear today is that the Pilgrims came over to kill Native Americans, to give them all these diseases. So it's a rewriting of history, and that's really what I wanted to do with this book. Was I really stemmed back to Dwight D. Eisenhower when he told the Allies, take pictures of what you see, because historians will say this never happened. And so that was really what stemmed everything. Was I wanted my generation to understand that what you're reading in a book isn't just a story. It's not just something that you open up and it's like a fiction. No, this actually happened. People died because of this. And if we don't understand it, we don't know it, this is going to happen again.
Well, and, to get off of the book a little bit and discuss just current history, I mean, you have to see, what does it say? History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, and
yeah.
And it's amazing to see the anti-Semitic movement really start taking ground. And I'm not Jewish, so I don't experience it. I just is based off of what I hear and what people tell me what they observe. But me personally, I haven't experienced it. But it does seem like there's an uptick on just Jew talk on Twitter and all these type of subjects, and it is eerily similar, like a multiverse version of what was going on in 1934. There was an economy that had been crashed. There was loose morals everywhere, and you had someone that was a strong talker and found a way to take everyone's troubles and put it on one problem. And I think whenever we see politicians, do that as a solution, those are huge red flags. And what I love about your book is like the main girl, she isn't Jewish. I didn't pick up on that. She is just merely protecting Jewish people in her community, which was a common theme during that time.
Corey Ten Boom. Yep.
Yeah. Say that again. What was that?
Corey Ten Boom.
I don't know what that means.
So Corey Ten Boom was she was a Christian who saved Jewish or Jews.
No, I haven't heard anything about her.
Yeah, she and her group that she had hid Jews, and she ended up in a concentration camp. She lost her father and her brother, and her and her sister, I think, ended up in Ravensbrück. And she later got freed, actually from a paperwork error. But yeah, she's written multiple books talking about her experience, and actually one of the best movies to watch about it is The Hiding Place, and it goes and talks about her life doing that. But one thing that you said about the language being eerily similar, I heard
I'm showing pictures here. Well, I didn't mean to distract you. Just pictures.
No, it's all right.
I ever heard of her.
I was sitting through a lecture about actually before I wrote this book, the lecture was discussing the Holocaust, and the lecturer, his name is Bill Jack. He actually ran for Colorado State Senate, and he had a line that's stuck with me. And what he said is, language matters because language are the ideas that carry the consequences which are the boxcars filled with people's lives. That the language of the Nazis towards the Jews had laid those tracks 10 years before. And what you're seeing now is you're seeing language. And I'm not talking about what you text or what you write. I'm talking about what you say. The language is being laid. The ideas are being laid. The tracks are being laid. And you're going to start seeing the consequences and the boxcars filled with people's lives that it's going to happen, because language isn't just speaking. It's about words. It's about the way you present the facts. And you're seeing it again. You're seeing it across the world. You're seeing, you just look at Israel with the whole Gaza situation. Israel's being painted as the horrible person, but yet their people were attacked and nobody says anything. So that's what I'm saying about the language. The language is starting to fall into place that's being eerily similar to what was falling into place in during that time.
Well, and it's fascinating too, where there is no middle ground when having these discussions. It is either 100% for or 100% against. And if to question policy that's going on in Israel, therefore automatically throws some of these people into these anti-Israel camps they don't want to be associated with. And I think that's what happened in Nazi Germany too. Like in your book, I think you show how the girl, the changing moment in her life is when she sees the SS officer throw the Jewish girl into the glass window, and she's all cut up, and there's nothing anybody can do, for fear that they themselves, suffer the exact. And I don't think people really realize, and that's what I love about this book, is it sort of sets the climate of what people were living in. These people that were living in Germany weren't Jewish. most of them, I would say, probably over 50% of them, had friends that were Jewish back in 1930, worked with Jewish people. And then as the language changed and the Jews started to become painted as this villain in Hitler's Germany, these people, instead of doing the right thing, what we would like to call the right thing in 2024, and speaking up and saying something, the majority of them turn a blind eye to what's going on and
Yep.
allow whatever to happen to happen. And I think you see a very similar type of disinterest in facts today. Like whatever the facts are, people who are whatever camp they're in, no new facts or no new information is going to change their predetermined opinion. It has been said, and that's what concerns me. Is there's no free talk anymore.
Well, I mean, you're not just seeing it over with the Israel issue. I mean, you see it here in the United States. You've had 4 years of constant harassment, constant chaos against not just people of faith, but of people who are conservatives, people who maybe don't vote the same way that other people vote. Not to get too much into it, but January 6th, there were a lot of people that were not inside the building who what happened that they ended up in prison, and guess what, there was nothing they could do because it was the government. It was the same thing as Germany. The government in Germany was doing this to people. They were they would basically, a Nazi could walk down the street, and if he just was angry about something that didn't even have to be angry at a Jew, he could just go and shoot them randomly, and it was okay.
He was mad because breakfast was bad. It didn't matter.
Right,
there was no consequences. There was no consequences.
Right, and that's the thing. That's what happens when you don't have people who are willing to stand up and fight. Somebody was asked, why did you not stand up when they came for the Jews? And I think it was Martin E. Muller, and he said, first they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Christians, and I did not speak out because I was not a Christian. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left. And I think that was really what was happening in Germany, was that if you didn't agree with the government, you were being silenced, you were being censored, you were being all of ridiculed. This stuff. Yeah, ridiculed, mocked, and even Germans were getting put in concentration camps or death camps for protecting Jews or for speaking out against what Hitler was doing. And there is something I want to say. A lot of people don't understand. Hitler would go in and he would say, "Oh, well, I just want to make peace with these nations." And what people don't understand is it wasn't that Hitler wanted to make peace. That wasn't what he was doing. It was a war tactic. If you look at the strategy as to what he was doing, every time he would sign a peace treaty with a country, it was about 4 or 5 days later, he would invade. That country would then have nothing they could do, because what would have happened in that peace deal, if you read multiple peace deals, especially the one with France, they gave all of their weapons, their ammunition to Hitler as a condition of this peace deal. So when he came in and he invaded, there was nothing these people could do. And so I think that is really something that people need to understand, that the other aspect of it is that I don't think this is actually shared in history very much, is that Hitler actually declared war on the United States. So 5 days before Pearl Harbor happened, Hitler had declared war. And the United States, FDR, was very much into wanting to stay neutral. Now, his vice president, I was reading a book by Bill Bennett called America Lost Best Hope, and he was talking about his vice president, I believe was Woodrow Wilson. And one of the things that Bill Bennett was saying was that Wilson was totally for not necessarily the Holocaust per se, but he was totally for what Hitler was doing. There's pictures of him getting awarded medals from Hitler. He's shaking hands with Hitler. There's speeches that he's made talking about Hitler's ideas. So you had,
not to interrupt you, but we've talked about this on our show with just eugenics. I don't know if you've done any research on the eugenics plan that was ran in America from 1900 to, well, I mean, it's still going on, but it was publicly ran from 1900 up until the 1940s. After the war, it had to be stopped because in the Nuremberg trials, the defense for the extermination and the sterilization of Jews, gypsies, and other religious minorities, the defense the Germans used was the American Supreme Court decision of the 1920s on the government's right to eugenicize and sterilize its own population. I mean, that's crazy. People don't understand how close we were to supporting Germany during World War II.
Well, not only that, but I don't think people actually know that our medical community, what it is today, all comes from what happened with the Holocaust. The Nuremberg trials, not all of the people that were there actually got the death penalty. Basically what happened was that the government cut a deal with these Nazi doctors that they would free them if they could have their medical information. So if you walk into a like Harvard or any of the medical teaching hospitals, everything that you see today, all of those, what they know about the human body came directly from the Nazis. They brought it over after the Nuremberg trials. So while we do have those advancements, it is very scary thought to think that it was used because of a evil thing that happened.
You talk about the gassing chambers that were used in Auschwitz and other places. Was used the chemical was Zyklon B that they taught in those stalls, and that was done by Bayer aspirin. I mean, they were part of the multi-group family that was drawing up plans on how to not just exterminate large groups of people, but how to do it in the most efficient, logical way. I mean, that was their job. Sit down and design blueprints and the elevators.
So there's also two other companies from the United States that were very much for what Hitler was doing. One was the New York Times. I have been doing a lot of research through Glenn Beck, and he has dug up a lot of the receipts from the New York Times where their authors, they actually had Nazis as authors. The other one was IBM. IBM was making a lot of the ammunition, was very much deep in the trenches of World War II and the Holocaust.
Well, and the banker that was supplying, that was brokering the transactions from those companies to Nazi Germany was Prescott Bush.
Yeah.
And it was so bad that Truman threatened to have him drawn up on treason charges if he didn't stop supplying the Nazis with money. And that's two of our presidents came from that family line. So, I mean, that should tell you something too about our interests.
Yeah. Well, and then you had at the same time, you had in the United States the Japanese internments going on, and while that is, some people can say that is understandable. There's also the other side that are saying, that these were American citizens. But then you also had on the flip side of that, you actually have, and I'm not saying this is a blanket, but this happened by the United States government, that there were Jews that were fleeing from Germany and the other countries, and the United States government refused to allow them into the United States to seek asylum, to seek protection. They turned them away, which is very interesting because you're starting to see that happening again.
Part. Yeah, we're not told that part. And all of those on that boat died, if I remember correctly. They all died in concentration camps or from the war in general. None of them made it past the war. And that's what, I grew up, and people that watch my show know this, but I grew up a Jehovah's Witness, and in that religion during that time, they were thrown in concentration camps for not participating in joining the Nazi Party or saying Heil Hitler. And every week they were given a sheet of paper to renounce their faith and join the Nazi Party. And there ended up being 2,500 witnesses that were murdered in those concentration camps. And I got to meet some of the survivors when I was young, which were, I was sort of curious what my interest in the subject would be if that hadn't happened. But to hear their stories, we had a sister in our congregation whose mother was raising their kids and in Nazi Germany, and cat out of the way. But she was raising her family in Nazi Germany. They were witnesses, so she couldn't get a job anywhere. No one would hire her because she wouldn't join the Nazi Party, and and because of that, they would have to steal food from other people's garden. And I just remember her telling that story, this little old German lady with this thick accent, and she felt so guilty that she stole food, and I'm sitting there thinking, like, her husband had been detained and thrown in a camp, and this was, for anyone that chose to defy the Nazi Party at that time, they were immediately targeted. And
Well,
I think,
I think that a lot of what people don't understand, because I've talked to people about the whole religious aspect, and a lot of people that I've talked to have said, well, Hitler let the Christians do whatever they wanted to do, but what people don't understand is Hitler infiltrated the church, and when he infiltrated the church, the first thing to go was the Bible. They got rid of the Bible. They had to, from their pulpits, they had to preach Mein Kampf. That was the only thing they could read. The churches were no longer what they called Christian churches. They were designated the title of Hitler's Christian Church. And then coinciding with that was the Hitler youth of the Hitler schools. And so these people were not being taught Jesus's commandments of love thy neighbor, do good to those who persecute you. All of what would have stopped Hitler. They weren't being taught that. They were being infused with Hitler's ideas that everything was that he was doing was right. And so I think that people don't understand that, yes, there was this religion, but it was what you call a twisted form of religion. It was basically a man taking a religion and twisting it so that he was the center of it, he was God. And that was what was so scary about Hitler. It wasn't just what he was doing, it was that he was setting himself up as a god to make these decisions as to who can live and who can die.
Well, and people, and what I think the scariest thing is, because it's the very nature of psychos to go that far. But what makes it scary in this case, and it's not just Hitler, we see this in a lot of different political or sports figures, is this immediate draw of a percentage of people that will just worship this person and just convince themselves he's infallible. To me, it's no different than people talk about how great it is religion has fallen by the wayside in some of these European countries. And to me, like, has it though? I mean, maybe Christianity has, but people's desire to worship and people's desire to venerate, that's still as strong as ever. But now what they're choosing to venerate is not, it's not the Christian basis. And it's eerie to what was going on in Germany, because Germany was very devout and strong in philosophy and industry, a very logical nation. And they were able to convince themselves that they were right on this. And when people talk about Hitler's strategy, like, why did he go into Russia? I mean, like, he could have kept Poland. He could have kept Poland, Czechoslovakia, Belgium, and France. They would have given him even that. But why did he keep going? Why did he keep The reason why isn't because it was based off of logic. It's all based off of ideology. And once you have a bad ideology rooted into your system, there's no stopping it until it just, destroys itself, which is what happened, which eventually happened to them. They burnt themselves out. I could go on this World War II stuff. I just think it's very interesting because I'm sure you've noticed, like you said, that the most people know about the Holocaust now is in a meme or in its denial. And I've noticed a lot on like Twitter and YouTube, the retranslation of Hitler's speeches into English, which I'm not against. I think these things should be. I'm a component of free speech. Everything should be brought out into the light so that we can teach people why these are bad ideas and why what this was said in this context led to the desecration of 80 million people.
So every other country in the entire world that was involved and indirectly involved in the Holocaust and World War II have mandated that the children in schools have to learn about the Holocaust, especially Germany. But yet you look at the United States, and it is not mandated that we have to learn it. It's one of the very many things that is not mandated, that in civics. And so the kids are not learning it, at least not in the United States. And it's really, I guess, disturbing, I would say, to see. I know people from other countries, and one of the things they say is it's disturbing to come over to the United States and be trying to have these intellectual conversations about the Holocaust, and also not just the Holocaust, but how what happened is starting to happen now, and the United States has no idea. My generation has no idea, and I think that was really my reason why, was because I wanted to tell people that this could happen again. This could very well happen to you. And what Hitler did is he wanted to basically have a one world government, which is happening today in a different way. You have Davos.
Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? It's that idea for one world government is being funded by the Deutsche Welle Bank of Germany
and George Soros, who worked with Hitler.
The best time of his life, he says. It was the best time of his life when he worked for the Nazis, according to him. That's according to him. 150 minutes.
And so that's that. Hearing that is very concerning. Especially when certain people praise George Soros. It's like, you're praising a man who was supporting mass murdering people. And not only was he supporting that, he was going into their homes and he was taking their things. He's talked about this openly, that one of the first things he did was he would go into their homes. He would basically listen to what they were saying. Then he'd go back and report. And then as they were being arrested, he would take everything that they had. And he wants another one world government, and people don't see it. People just, I don't know if it's, they don't want to see it, so they're going to stick their head in the sand and just pretend it's not happening, or they just honestly don't know.
I don't think that's it at all. I think maybe 20% of our population is like that, but I think the majority of people everywhere, like I'll give you an example. A weird trend popped up on my algorithm on YouTube, and it was Palestinian families tasting American foods or listening to American songs, or and it was all translated, and it millions of views, and I thought that was interesting why that would get such traction. And what occurred to me is, like, people, as I grew up, with the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War, these people were propagandized towards me as unintelligent, stupid, goat farmers that really didn't matter if they lived or died anyway. As long as we got Osama bin Laden. And now watching these videos, you get a human connection with them. They try the same food we try, and um, I think that there is uh, somewhat of a change with the ability of people to talk with each other that they weren't able to in 1945, 1930s. Like there was communication between the higher ups. There wasn't that language barrier. But you and me, we didn't have access to what was going on. Maybe the Florida news reported that there was a ship outside the coast full of Jews that needed let in. But was the family in Nebraska that was just trying to, survive on their little farm, were they getting that information? And now we actually see people being able to transmit information from nobody to nobody like that on Twitter or YouTube or these other social media programs. And I feel like people like Soros and this push for one world government, which is definitely there, it hasn't been stopped. But it has surprisingly been slowed down from the acceleration we were looking at in the early 2000s to now here we are 2024, and they've stalled out yet again on getting this one world government together. So I hold out a little hope that maybe there is a little bit of a change from what happened in the 1940s to what will happen here. But what I love about your book, and I noticed you included 3 different songs. I counted. I might be off. It might have been.
Did.
And we played one of those at the beginning in case people were wondering what that was about. And I love that song because there's a point in your book where your character, I call it the Job complex, where they start feeling bad for themselves and woe is me. Why am I putting myself in this horrible situation when I could just give away the information, promise never to do it again, and walk away? And I feel like that's a pretty normal arc in a character. Why did you feel like it should be included in this debate between the character and herself as to why she was debating, was it worth it?
So that all stemmed back to I can't remember the girl's name right now, but one of the resistance, I think it was the White Leaf Resistance. And at that time, she was thinking to herself, not necessarily is this worth it, but am I making a difference? And I think that was part of it. The other part of it was I needed to have an internal struggle. If you look at any point of growth, not just in a character growth, but in a human growth, there is always a internal struggle. There was always an internal conflict between doing what is right and taking the easy road, and or taking the easy way out. And I needed to have this dynamic of having her have that struggle so that the readers could understand that this is not just a character. There were people that actually experienced that. For example, you had children who were being told to turn their parents in, and they had a choice to make. Were they actually going to do the right thing and stand with their family, stand with their parents, and not say anything? Or were they going to do what Hitler was telling them to do? And there was this internal conflict happening all the time. And so that was really, I wanted to highlight that internal conflict, that it's not just something that you see all the time in books, that this is actually something that people wrestle with on a day-to-day basis all the time.
Have you ever heard of the Milgram experiment done in the 60s?
I have not, no.
Yeah, this is a fascinating study. The person that did it, his parents survived the Holocaust, and he wanted to do a study to see how many people would be willing to torture someone if the responsibility was taken away from them. And so he came up with a plan, and he disguised it as a learning program, in which one person would get hooked up to like all these different electrodes put all over their body, and they'd be in a different room. And then in the other room would be this person who had no clue what was going on, and he would read these questions. And if the person got them wrong, he would hit a button, and it would send volts over to the other room. And what that person was told is it would help retain memory loss. So if the guy couldn't remember something, the electric volts actually helped him. And it would go from 15 volts, and it progressed all the way to like 250 volts, all on one switchboard. And each time the guy got it wrong, it would advance up all the way to the top. Well, of course, everyone was in it except for the person reading the questions. And on the other side, the person would pretend they were having a heart attack or some medical condition. Pretty soon he would stop responding. And the people would be like, well, is he all right? Should I stop? And as long as Milgram was in there with his lab coat and told them to proceed, they would do it. And it was like 89% did it all the way to 250 volts. It was astonished. It astonished people because it was, first of all, an unethical test.
Mm-hmm.
But it showed how easily people were willing to do horrible things to someone else as long as they didn't get in trouble for it. And I've always thought about that study, when it, because it proved that, the propaganda of what worked in Nazi Germany, like one guy didn't, very few people knew that they were gassing, 500,000 people in a year. They thought they were just in a labor camp working.
Well, it's just like Boy in the Striped Pajamas. That there's this one scene where, the one of the scenes they move basically in front of the death camp where they're gassing Jews, and the boy, he was told he was forbidden to go there, and when he went there, he asked his dad, who was a Nazi officer, about what the gas chambers were, and his dad just told him, oh, they were showers. That's what they were telling the German citizens and anybody else who asked. They just said, oh, they're just going to take a shower. But it didn't compute. When people started figuring it out, what happened was because it didn't compute that these people would go in and they would never come back out again. And but the other thing that they would do, they would burn people and they would bury them alive. And they would basically dig these mass graves. And when I mean mass graves, I mean basically a trench. And they would just throw them in there, dead or alive. And
spraying with 2 bullets,
Yeah. Yeah. And they would also, you can go to the, I think it's Auschwitz actually. And you can see that they have all of the shoes of the people who came through Auschwitz, the Jews. And it stands there as a memorial that this is how many people this one death camp killed. And the thing was, Hitler would say that they were going to work camps, and yes, there were work camps, but a lot of those work camps off-site actually had gas chambers, like probably like a mile or two that nobody knew about. So if for some reason a Jewish person did not want to do what they were being told, they would just say, okay, either I shoot you or I gas you. But there was actually very few work camps. Almost all of them were death camps.
Yeah. And talked to some. I remember as a young kid watching some interviews of people that survived the death marches at the very end, where if there was any type of limp or injury and you couldn't keep up, you were just immediately shot. You can read accounts. There's one crazy video on YouTube of some kids shot at a German patrol car, and so the German army came in and just killed the whole town. And that was their way of sending messages to other towns, like, this is what happens. You mess around, we're gonna just kill everyone. And 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 Germany is not the first people to do that, and we're not the last country to just go and indiscriminately murder thousands of people with no fear of consequence. And I think we have enough information now where we can watch how the media tries to propagandize a nation to dehumanize a race or a culture. And it's amazing how easily it's done. But for people who pay attention to history or read a book like this, Schideler's Goal, uh, you see the patterns, and you start to. That's what I love about the Christian aspect of this. That's really driving her to do these acts of a kindness that put her own life in danger. It's all based off of her Christian faith, do unto others as you would do to yourself. Um, and that's in the times where it becomes very difficult in a decision of, do I save myself or do I try to save as many people as I can? Even though this is a novel based off of what thousands of people were doing in Germany, Poland, Russia, the Netherlands. There were thousands of families that had to face these type of decisions and did the right thing. And I think that's the exciting part of this, is that there are hundreds of thousands of people. I think, like you mentioned, watching Glenn Beck and his breakdown of some of this history. There are thousands of people that did the right thing, and some of them died for it. They did.
Yep.
And some of them got to live, and some of them saved thousands of people. Thousands of families were saved, or thousands. By the time the fourth generation has come along, you're talking a whole town of people saved just by the action of one family, one person. And so if you we'll share a link to your book when we post this on our show here on YouTube. But for anyone wanting to get Schideler's Goal, where can they find it?
So you can find it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Christian book distributors, basically any major platform other than Target. They removed my book for some reason.
Really?
It was selling. Yeah, it was selling in the stores, selling online, and then they just decided they didn't want to sell it. And when asked, they gave no explanation. So I was like, okay. But yeah, so basically anywhere books are sold, it's mostly online right now. I would suggest Amazon and Christian book distributors. Those two are pretty good with their shipping rates. Also, you can go to my website, which is realcslark.wixsite.com. That will give a list of stores where to buy it. And I think
you got your YouTube channel as well.
I do. I have my YouTube channel. You can also follow me on both Truth Social and Twitter. I refuse to call it X. I just think that just calling it X is kind of dumb. But
I agree, right? It feels better when there's more to it. Anyway.
But yeah, I mean, I could talk about this book all night. I do have some extra time. So if
tell me. Tell me a little bit more when it comes to like your future goals. I mean, because like you wrote this book, I think we all agree. Like we look back 6 years from now or 10 years from now, like there's parts of us that have grown. At least we hope that have grown and matured into a better understanding. Like when you go into this book and you reread it, like how would you like to expound on it now that you didn't have the foresight when you first wrote it?
I think what I'd like to do, if I had to do another edition of the book and update it, would be to go through and focus more on the not just the internal struggle, but the family dynamic struggle where she loses her mother, she loses her father, and And then you see her brother, who she thinks has become a Nazi, but while he seems to be a Nazi, he's also learning the secrets of the Nazis and giving those back to the Allies. I think that area.
He sort of seemed like the atypical guy that wasn't very politically motivated, but at the same time, like, I viewed him sort of like like a blue collar type of fellow, where he just sort of saw like, hey, if I'm going to survive here and protect people I care for, they're killing people who aren't Nazis. So I'm going to do the thing that, join the party. And then it sort of seems like he goes through a progression where he realizes like as he's looking out for his sister, he sort of realizes what this Nazi party actually stands for and what evil they're capable of committing.
So he kind of did an Oscar Schindler, where if you've ever watched the movie, you'll notice that Oscar Schindler in the beginning was very much for the Nazi Party, and then there's one scene in the movie that he really understood what was happening, and that's when he comes out of a building and he sees his car, and his car is all over his car. What we think looks like snow because it's a black and white movie, it's actually ashes from human bodies. And in the scene, he touches it and feels it, and that's when he understands what's going on. And then you watch as he starts saying to the Nazis, well, I'm going to help you. And then he's doing things like he is, hijacking their ammunition that he's making so it doesn't work. So I kind of wanted this character to kind of have a progression where he's like, okay, I'm all in this, but then have his eyes open and be like, okay, wait, this is not what I signed up for. This is not what I thought this was going to be. And what they're saying that this is going to be. Because you have to remember at first, when people were first hearing this, it wasn't like Hitler just said, "Oh, the Jews are the problem." That wasn't what he said. He appealed to people's interests and egos. He started out by saying,
and intellect.
Yeah, and intellect. He started by saying, if you want to be a dentist, if you want to be a doctor, if you want to be, a journalist, you've got to knock out these Jews so that you can go and actually be that. And so it was all intellectually, and then once he got them intellectually, then it became what it was. So when people started believing Hitler, the vast majority of them didn't understand that this is what he was doing, that this is what they were supporting.
You sort of see a similar wake up, I feel, going on in America with the Democrat Party. And I guess I use that term loosely. There is a extreme wing that has really hijacked that party, and you see all these crazy type of. I'm sure you've seen the whole documentary of What Is a Woman, and it's just sort of astounding to see how people struggle to answer just a question like that. And it's not that they necessarily are struggling because they don't know. It's a struggle because it's based out of fear. What happens to me if I get this wrong? Who cancels?
And the interesting thing is this whole battle with transgenderism actually came from Nazi Germany. I was listening to Glenn Beck about 3 weeks ago, and he was saying that the first ever transgender surgery was done to a man in Nazi Germany during the Holocaust. The man ended up dying. I believe it. I don't know if it was sepsis, but they made a huge fatal mistake, and in the process, and he ended up not surviving. So everything that we see in modern America, whether it be in medicine or transgenderism, it's all, you notice the one root that it stems back to is Nazi Germany.
Well, and I've always said that, look at the jump in technology right after World War II. Of course, every time there's huge wars, there's a jump in technology just because nations are trying to win a battle. And so there's a race for technology. But when it came to Germany, these tests that, this elite group of scientists were running, You just to give people an idea of some of these tests, you can go through the Holocaust Museum and there'll be videos of someone with a mosquito net just around their arm. And the notes for the test were, how does this person handle 10,000 mosquito bites? And that was it. That was literally the test, was just what happens here. And you had tests with twins where, they wouldn't, there was, I forget what that doctor's name was, that eventually escaped to Argentina, which now has the highest rate of twins than any other nation per capita. And it was because they had free cadavers. They were treating anyone that went into, and Jews were definitely the majority, but there was gypsies, there was Lutherans, there was Methodists, there were some Catholics that were thrown into these concentration camps as well.
But you also had political prisoners as well. So you had people from Poland who disagreed with what was happening, and because Poland was invaded, they got put into concentration camps. My dad's father actually came from Norway, and he, when Hitler invaded Norway, his father skied across the frozen ocean because Hitler had mandated that any of the youth had to enlist in the Nazi army. And if you didn't, you'd be put into a concentration camp. So he skied across the frozen ocean. I don't remember what country, may have been Sweden, I think. But he skied. He was able to get away, but there was a lot of that going on. A lot of political prisoners, a lot of people who, not necessarily, when it came to political prisoners, it didn't necessarily come to, did they support the Jews, did they not support the Jews? It more or less came down to, did they support Hitler's ideology? Were they, did they want to free Poland, whatever? It was basically, any opposition to Hitler's ideology of power.
And we already got our first strike on YouTube, so I'm going to talk about COVID. The parallels between how COVID was handled, as far as like the propaganda towards people that wouldn't fall in line with whatever the thing that was being propagated to us at the time. I had a friend that was in Colorado that didn't wear a mask. And he had a store manager at Walmart follow him around, just yelling at him the entire time he shopped. I remember going to a store saying I couldn't wear a mask for health reasons, because it was very, very early on, and I thought I'll just get away by saying health reasons, and the look he gave me, I felt like a second citizen. And these pastors that were holding services out in the woods, in the open woods, and the governor was arresting these pastors and shutting down their churches. And
then you had some pastors who were preaching to get the vaccine. You had one of which was Franklin Graham. You look at his Facebook page, and one thing he stated was that Jesus preaches to love one another, and that we need to be good Samaritans. So to be a good Samaritan and to love your neighbor, you should get the COVID vaccine. You had other pastors as well, big name pastors, that were also saying to get the COVID vax. And I think that is that was what kind of turned a lot of Christians off, was that pastors were not standing for Christians. You also had my former line of work, which I'm not going to say where I worked, or the person this happened to, but when I left the place of work, it was right in the middle of the pandemic, and I was starting to see that some of the pandemic things were coming down not from corporate, but just the district manager and such. And when I left, we'd gotten a new manager, and it was April of 2022, and I was sitting at my desk at home, and I got this text from one of my former coworkers. She was 35, perfectly healthy woman, And she said to me, she said, something is wrong. And I texted her back and I was like, what's wrong? And she's like, I can't breathe. My throat is closing. I'm breaking out into hives. And I immediately started asking, okay, what did you eat? What did you drink? Thinking it was food related. So she went to the urgent care and they just told her, oh, you're just having a reaction to something you ate. And so they gave her some antihistamines, and the antihistamines weren't working. It was like 4 days later, she texts me back and she goes, I cannot get out of bed. I cannot do anything. And I said, well, don't go to the urgent care. Go to the emergency room. She walked in the emergency room and the doctor said, oh, you're having a reaction to the COVID-19 vaccine. Don't take any others. If you take any of the boosters, you will die. And she was like, well, how do you know it's the COVID vaccine? And he said, because all of my nurses in the emergency department have taken it, had the boosters, and had the exact same reaction you had. And so it wasn't just the government forcing masks. It was companies forcing, and it was like my corporate, the corporate office of my company, they had not put in a vax mandate due to the fact that they hire so many people in their stores who have various health issues. It was a rogue manager who decided to do it, and it was putting people's lives at risk. And
well, and it reminded me, you talk about this connection between government and corporations, and we were really exposed to the start. I mean, that's always been the case in America. You know, we can have this idealistic view, but corporations have always had, or businesses have always had a strong play. Right now, they're disguised as corporations.
Public-private partnerships.
Yeah, and it's not much different than what was going on in Nazi Germany. It wasn't the government necessarily mandating these things, but it was using the corporations to issue the mandates to control the populace. That way the government could say, hey, you know, we believe in the business's right to decide what they want for employees. You know, we don't want to get involved with that. Meanwhile, they were, you know, feeding them false information, or, you know, there was huge paybacks to some of these, especially these huge hospital conglomerates, where they were getting huge kickbacks from pharmaceuticals, and the government was also, you know, everyone was reaping benefits from it. And you saw this. I mean, it's not much different than how Nazi Germany tried to control the businesses at their time. You know, like, you know, hey, you know, your business wants these benefits, or are they 100% not made of you know, Nazi party members? Or are you employing any Jews? Like, we can't give you a tax benefit if you're, you know, going against the wishes of our government. But they're not going to sit there. Go ahead.
It was also the use of propaganda. And it wasn't just in Nazi Germany. You had propaganda that was being flooded into the United States. We don't go to movie theaters now much anymore, but at that time, movie theaters was a thing, and you would sit there, and before your movie, you would get the news of the day. You would get, you know, whatever news station was on. They would come in for like, I don't know, I think it was like 15 minutes, and they would give you all of the news, all of the headlines. And then after that came on, you had a propaganda reel from Nazi Germany. And what was it about? It was about the concentration camps, and almost every single one of them showed kids playing with balls in circles in these concentration camps, and oh, they were so happy. And then you fast forward to today, and you start watching, everything you're being told is all propaganda. Everything you're being told, what were you being told about COVID? What were you being told about transgenderism? What were you being told about climate change? It's all propaganda. And, you know, Dave Ramsey has the line that he says often. He says, say a lie often enough, loud enough, and long enough, and pretty soon people start to believe it.
He's better than he deserves. Old Dave Ramsey. Well, and I think there's like... I don't know if you've ever read the book Propaganda by Edward Bernays.
I have not, no.
He is the father of American propaganda. And he laments right away in chapter 1 that they were so good at pointing out Nazi propaganda that they could no longer use the word propaganda in American culture without it having a negative tone. And that's like that was his pride point, that they had propagandized American people so well that when they heard that word, that it denoted immediate, even today, like we hear the term propaganda and it still rings Nazi
We think
Germany.
of China, or we think of Russia, or we think of,
The
Germany,
enemy.
but
Enemy,
but
not us.
every single day, I mean, you turn on this, and every single day you're getting propaganda.
We did a episode called P is for Brainwashed. If any of your fans want to give it a listen, but we went into how in 2013 I found this this interview done by the Broadcasting Board of Governors in the United States, and they brought on the head of Pepsi, the head of Goldman Sachs, and then a couple of major documentary filmmakers, and asked them how it was an open air, it was an open question format, and they all talked about how they ran propaganda campaigns in 2011 in the Middle East, and how they did it through Pepsi. It was financed through JP Morgan. And then Pepsi sponsored all of these televised events on those networks, which included like America's Got Talent, American Idol, but it was for those countries. And it was all to propagandize the people so that when 2013 came or 2012 came around, they could create coups in all these countries. And this interview took place in 2013, and they were talking about how that experience and the lessons they learned were now going to be used on the American people. And you watch that time frame, and you and I have the benefit of being homeschooled, so we were detached at some point in our life from the propaganda of the public school system. And so
but it took a long time. It took a long time. There was a lot that I don't want to say detoxing, but there was a lot, because for me, I guess we had talked about earlier that you had wanted some information about how this all came about. When I was in public school, I was basically being inundated with liberal ideology every single day. It wasn't just from 8 to 2:30. I would get on the bus at 6 in the morning, and I wouldn't get home until 4 in the afternoon. So it was from 6 in the morning until 4.
And we're not just talking about teachers. We're talking about signs. Right. We're talking about events. We're talking about public peer pressure, and you don't even notice that until you're removed from it.
Right. And I had, I still do have conservative parents, and there was a time in my life where I tried to reconcile the liberal views and the conservative views, and I was like, okay, I was trying to figure them out, and it wasn't until I got homeschooled and I actually read, like I said earlier, Bill Bennett's America Last Best Hope. And anybody who's wondering who Bill Bennett is, he was Ronald Reagan's education secretary. He was the youngest man in Reagan's cabinet, and it wasn't until I started reading his 2-volume books did I actually start. That was when my whole shift in perspective, in worldview came about, because the way you see the world, the way you see politics, it's not necessarily ideological. It's your worldview. And one of the things I learned from that lecture I was talking about earlier, he says a lot of this whole thing happening with Nazi Germany and what's happening in the United States is it comes from a secular worldview. It comes from removing God from everything in society. And so being homeschooled really infused, especially where I went to a Christian homeschooling co-op, it infused God back into schooling and into your lives. Now, that being said, not everybody that went to a homeschool Christian co-op was in fact a Christian. But having the homeschooling experience to be able to actually understand unfiltered history as to what happened, it was a defining moment in my life. The first time I read the first 2 volumes, it was in a task for one of my classes. It's not a textbook. It's very thick volumes, and I was just like, I'm just gonna get through this to read this. And then I think it was like 2 years later, I was like, you know what, I want to go back and I want to read this again. And but the other thing that really framed my my worldview and the way I see the world is a textbook called America's Founding Fathers, and it goes through the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the 27 Amendments, and then it talks about the founders of the United States. And it gives you, for example, when somebody says, oh, well, Ben Franklin didn't believe in God because he was a deist. Well, no, actually, Ben Franklin did believe in God because before every session in Congress, he said that they needed to start their sessions with prayer. George Washington did believe in God. Yes, he was a Mason. Masonry was not the same as it is now. Back then, George Washington prayed before every battle. He read his Bible to his soldiers. But that was where my shift came about. It was basically in a realignment of my values. Now, that being said, there are some things that I still can't see the liberal points, but do I hold those beliefs? No. But it, like you were saying before, it takes a very long time. I want the audience to know it's not just like, oh, one day I'm in public school and the next day I'm a conservative. I just wake up. No, it is, when transitioners say that they have to go through a detox, a detransition, it's like that, only it's in your mind. You have to basically unlearn everything that you've learned.
Yes. Yeah. And I love my history of how I was raised. I do view it as a cult, the Jehovah's Witness religion. And, but besides that factor, the people that are the normal parishioners that visit the church and the day to day and the people I grew up with were all good hearted people that genuinely believed they were serving God the best way they could. And so, like, I don't like to look back on that with a lot of remorse, because it established a belief where I could spring forth and do my own research and really, like you say, there's a process of deprogramming that has to take place first. And what started me on my path, because I have been trained to be a missionary, and I was planning on going to Ukraine, the Donbass region, actually, to speak to Russian-speaking Ukrainians out there. And so I was learning Russian, and they had us study the Russian culture to get an idea of who the people we would be preaching to, what their belief system was, how they were raised. And one of my studies was about how communism came about and really turned the nation against Christianity. And they really developed a society where the main religion was the state, and everything was for the state. And, as a young person, when I read about communism on paper, to me, it felt really good, because everyone, you want everyone to be loved. You want everyone to, be taken care of. You don't want to see sick children or starving children or trafficked children, or, you want to see a healthy society. And communism really played on that emotion with people. And then once it was implemented, how many people did Stalin kill? I mean, it was like 50, like 50 million people, or, maybe that was Mao. I think he was for like 10 million or something. Mao beat him out.
And that's one of the things that Lily used to talk about on the campaign was about communism. And but you see it in Nazi Germany. It was people don't like to say it, but it was a communist society. Everything that you did ended up back into the government. Everything was for the government. Everything was for the Fuhrer. Everything was, that's what it was. It was a communist society.
And they talked about how they were, because, you know, Russia had a rich cultural history before 1918 when they delved into communism. And what started my awakening process was, you know, they talked about how propaganda was used, especially after World War II by Stalin, to really instill these beliefs of hate. And what they did was they would, you know, like at first they went after all the religious organizations that didn't support communism. And, you know, they ran like a 5-year campaign on TV and on radio talking about the horrors of these people and, you know, daily updates of things they had messed up or, you know, people they had hurt or injustices done. And then one day they all came and arrested them all in the middle of the night and took them to the gulags. You know, and then it became the farmers were the problem. And so then they went after the farmers for 10 years. And then all of a sudden, all the farmers are gone and there's collective farms everywhere. And it was, and people were okay with this because it took 5 years of hearing it every day. And then, you know,
well, it's like the analogy: you put the frog in the pot, you turn it the heat up gradually, and the frog's not going to do anything because it doesn't notice the heat.
And you talk about how we've seen that in our own generation with, you know, I've with this P. Diddy stuff coming out, you know, I've been going down because we want to talk about that on the show. And they go back to some of Big Papa's original music videos in the 1990s. And they had transgender females as main characters in those music videos. Hidden, of course. The public didn't really know, but there was hints in the videos. And I was watching this one guy, and he was like, they were grooming us. That's all the 90s were. That rap culture, especially for the Black community, was being slowly groomed to accept this type of normality. This was going to be accepted as a normality. And you see this in Hollywood. You see this, you know, 10 years ago, if you had said we would be having the discussions we have now, you know, you wouldn't believe it. You know, Phantom Facts we're really proud of. We discovered the plot to install kitty litter in bathrooms. Have you heard about this?
I have, yes.
So this was dismissed by all the major news media outlets, although they only quoted Canadian newspaper sources. And so we went around and we asked people from at least 20 different states, including in South Dakota, Iowa, Nebraska, middle, strong Republican, conservative, ideal states. I would say about 90% of the school districts had that vote within a 6-month period. And so, like, when you talk about propaganda, you know, like, it's here. Like, it's being slowly, constantly tried to be injected into the public school system because that's how you affect change, right? We're too old.
Yeah, and that was all set up by the Nazis. Pete Hegseth, Trump's nominee for the DOD, did a series when he was at Fox News, focusing on the education. He called it the miseducation of America. And in this series, he went through from preschool all the way up to college. And he looked at where all of this ideology stems back to. And it stems back to a majority of it, Nazi Germany. That is where, the liberalness from colleges, you had multiple Nazis who came through Nuremberg, who again cut deals with the government, who basically restructured our entire college system from institutions of debate to institutions of censorship and what you see today. This is what you're seeing in colleges today is not just exclusive to Gen Z or millennials. This has been happening progressively over the course of many decades. And it started, the grooming of society again, that started back in Nazi Germany. They started with a whole generation of kids saying, you can change your gender. You can do this. And so it's very interesting to see how a lot of Nazi Germany's ideologies and everything are seeping into the United States. And also, one of my biggest fascinations right now is watching the parallels of the United States currently to the descriptions in the book 1984. There are very much similarities that are happening between the two.
It's eerie, and I don't know if you know the history of behind, and I'm going to get some of the timeline wrong, but when Orson Welles wrote that book, he was a communist sympathizer, and then he went over and helped the Russians in a civil war. I think it was insane. The Russians were helping him out, and the Russians were talking to him about how bad it had become under Stalin. And it scared him so much that a civilization, and people don't understand, like Russia was a cultural epicenter. They had, we talk about the female queens of the England era. Queen Catherine of Russia was, the queen of queens. I mean, she, the stuff she did to advance her nation at that time and to really progress the Russian culture and influence was unheard of by any other type of monarch. And to go from that type of culture to it completely erased over a period of 20 years and to, completely erased. You see trends of that in America, like you were saying. You see, the propagandizing of, and to me, like I think of, I don't know if you've done much study on Carthage and Roman period, but Carthage is to believe to be the settling point for where the Canaanites eventually settled after they were thrown out of the Promised Land. And the reason why they know that is because a lot of the Canaanite gods show up in archaeological dig sites in Carthage, which became a superpower that rivaled Rome. So much so that Rome lost a couple of battles before they were finally able to conquer them. And Carthage was known for its child sacrifice, for its loose morals. It was a do as thou wilt, Aleister Crowley type of mentality. And the
Sodom
Germans,
and Gomorrah.
It was, yes. So the story of Molech and the sacrificing of children that the Israelites had to cast out. They found 200,000 burial urns of sacrificed children in Carthage with inscriptions for, better crops or children or, future children, obviously, or, for their livestock. 200,000. And they had believed that it was all a lie. No culture would sacrifice their own children. That doesn't make any sense.
The United States is doing it every day.
I just saw a stat that out of all the wars fought in mankind, there has been 1.3 billion deaths. Since abortion has been allowed in the United States in 1980, there has been 1.3 billion babies killed. Now, you talk about a child sacrifice. You talk about child sacrifice for a culture that promotes war.
Excuse me 1 minute. Yeah.
Experiencing technical difficulties here at Fan of Facts. That's C S Lark. Once again, plug her book, Schideler's Goal. Get a full shot of that. Just a great book. Full of, it's just interesting because when it comes to Nazi Germany, it's so, we're almost at 100 years now to when, we're almost right at 100 years from when Hitler starts advocating his ideas in Mein Kampf and the takeover of Germany takes place. Do you think we'll see a similar thing happen in the United States? You think this election of Trump is just a temporarily just hold off what is inevitable to happen?
It depends. So Trump is one person. He can do things like pull us out of the Paris Climate Accords, which one of the things Glenn Beck has said is once we get pulled out of that, that will kind of start spiraling the Davos down. But Trump is one person. What he needs is he needs people to actually wake up and actually do something, because during Nazi Germany you had people like Corey ten Boom saving the Jews, but you didn't have everybody. You didn't have a whole nation. You didn't have 83 million people behind you. And I think that people need to not sit back. They need to not say, oh, Donald Trump's going to protect me. Oh, Trump has this. Oh, he's going to do that. The fight, as Glenn Beck says, is just beginning. There was a fight for the elections, and now there's a fight to stop, to undo what is happening. Glenn Beck has a series on currently where he's going through basically every part of the government, not Congress, but the bureaucracy. Is basically he's saying there's a surgery that has to be done in the body of America, and that's not going to be done overnight. That's not going to be something that Donald Trump or Elon Musk or Vivek Ramaswamy do. That's going to come from the American people actually fighting. And when we say fight, I don't mean violence in the streets. I mean actually standing up and doing something. For example, going to your school board, not just protesting what your school board is doing, but run for office, get on your school board so you can stop what is happening. Getting involved, getting active. I know people who they refuse to vote because they say they're voting for lesser of two evils. And the problem with that mentality is that if you're just going to sit there and say, I'm not going to vote, then you are inevitably, like that saying goes, by not deciding, you are making a choice. So you are saying, I'm not going to vote, I'm not going to be involved. Then really, do you have that right to actually say about your government and your country that there needs to be reform? So you made your voices heard November 5th. Now it's time to actually start doing what you say you want, the change.
I think that's what's so nice about this book, because it dances around the importance of personal responsibility. We talk about these people, and we've never met these people that acted bravely, sacrificed their lives in some instance. But when it comes down to it, they made a decision that it stops now. And within their means, they did everything possible to vocalize or help the people that were being targeted or treated unfairly or persecuted. And in the end, that's what it's going to come down to when it comes to our nation's health, is I think that we are at a special time where we could go one of two ways. We could be the nation that turns its eye to the ruling elite and the devil worship that takes place there, and just worry about making sure that our family has food on the table. And there are millions of people that's their viewpoint. Or like you mentioned, there is a group of people that action is required. And I think it's interesting when you talk about, like, we talk about these global problems, and we like, on this show, we like to do that too, because I think, like, for context, it's important. Like, we need to understand what's really going on before we can fix what's in our own backyard. Because otherwise, how are you going to fight the enemy if you don't know who you're fighting? But at the same time, it does come down to a matter of personal responsibility. Are you going to call your local senator? Are you going to run for office? Are you going to do your own research? Part of personal responsibility is just the simple act of finding out what the facts are versus what the propaganda is. Like, if like the woman in your book had just chosen to turn a blind eye to what happened to all the Jewish neighbors they had, there had been no issue whatsoever. And there was plenty of people that did that. Anyway, hey, I know I kept you 30 minutes longer than I promised, but I appreciate you coming on our show, giving us a real in-depth look at your work here. Any future projects coming up that we need to keep our eye out for CS Lark?
So I actually do have my second book into the publisher currently. It is a kind of a shift from young adult into a children's book. I am currently also in the process of working on a manuscript that is a young adult story. When I was in high school, I had wanted to be in the FBI, and I had started getting the process ready to go into the FBI. I had started lining up colleges that would intern into that. And then I started watching the FBI abuses, and I said, yeah, no, I don't want to do that. But I do have the mind of a detective, so I decided I'd try to write a crime mystery novel. I started that a year ago, and then I got involved in politics, something I said I'd never do. And then that throughout politics on my days off, I worked on it. But then I sat down at the computer, I don't know, a couple months ago to write it. And all of these thoughts and ideas were swimming in my brain. And I sat in front of the computer and it was all gone. So I said, you know what? My publisher wants something. I'll see if I can do a children's book. In the meantime, get everybody to focus on that and then work on this. So.
All right. Well, let us know when it comes out. I'm sure everyone would like to get a chance to read that as well. Anything you would like to finish on before we let you go? CS, final words.
Somebody the other day had asked me what advice would I give to somebody who wants to be an author. And I've been thinking about it for a few days, and I think the advice that a lot of people give is, just focus on something, practice, pursue your dreams. But one of the things that I thought of that was kind of unusual was pick any, I said 50 words, and actually try to make a story. That's how I started writing. I was actually in second grade and I had some 50 spelling words, and I created a story. And then I used those 50 words to tell a story of expanding on that. So I think my main thing is find something like 50 words, 25 words. I don't know. Find a sequence of words that you can make a story off of that might be interesting, and then just kind of see where it goes from there. I didn't go to college to write. There are writers who get their master's in writing. I did not get my master's in writing. And so you don't have to have a college degree to be a writer. But it does help. But I guess in a society where you can be who you want to be and do what you want to do, start out with something like 50 words. Think of a story, and then just expand on that story, and then put that story aside for, I usually do, just because it's me, I usually do like 2 months, and I don't even think about writing. I just get together with friends, I do family stuff, and then I come back to it and I expand upon it, and I rework it, and then I send it to the publisher. And I'm not saying that's a magic formula, but that helps.
Schideler's Goal by C.S. Lark. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank
really
you.
Appreciate you. Let us know when your new book comes out. We'll be sure to give it a plug.
I will.
C.S. Lark, everybody. Thank you again so much for coming on the show. And of course, we always finish with the Kiffness here at FatFX.
works are not perfect for the people of the world. Why do you have to work so hard?
If you don't subscribe to Phantom Facts Society, then don't talk to me or my son ever again.
Ever.
This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. Systems are advised to take the following steps. If exposed, remove the payload.